Welcome to Hidden Business Risk. I'm Dan Butler. Today, we walk through a simple, powerful through line, a midweek payroll freeze at a 12-person subscription company that suddenly made the whole team scramble. Imagine payroll scheduled for Friday, vendor bills piling up, and your bank says they've placed a hold on your processor funds. The lights don't go out, but the downstream effects are immediate. Missed transfers, nervous vendors, and a CEO who's trying to reconcile optimism with overdue invoices.
That anonymous freeze is our case study for 3 wins you can implement fast. First, a contract red line that limits unilateral hold triggers. Second, an evidence-first dispute workflow to shorten reserve windows. And third, a 30-day reconciliation sprint that prioritizes cash availability over perfect engineering. We'll work the playbook step by step, so you can start protections this week.
That story hits home. Small companies feel it particularly hard because there's less buffer in days cash. When I hear payroll freeze, I think access, documentation, and what the contract actually says about holds and reserves. There's a legal side you can shape before a crisis, and a lot you can't change in the heat of it unless you planned ahead.
From an ops and tech perspective, I think about the telemetry you need to spot a freeze before payroll hits. Settlement delays, unexplained declines in payouts, spikes in chargebacks. Those are your early warning lights. If you know which signals matter, you can keep one step ahead.
All right, let's get practical. First up, the finance lens. How big is the typical cash shock here? For a 12-person subscription startup with monthly payroll of, say, $60,000 and 2 weeks of AP, a single midweek reserve can create a 7 to 14-day shortfall, depending on float. That gap isn't hypothetical. It's the reason people make desperate, expensive decisions. 2 KPIs matter most: days cash on hand and float days. Days cash tells you how many days you can run at current burn without new receipts. Float days measures the delay between when money is captured and when it lands in your account. If your float grows from 2 days to 9, payroll gets risky, fast.
Right, and finance teams need simple triage rules. I recommend 3 buckets: green for operational friction you can own, amber for issues requiring expedited negotiation, and red for legal engagement. Green is things like reconcilable settlement timing. Amber is unusual large disputes or unexpected reserve increases. Red is processor threats to terminate or allegations suggesting fraud. Escalation criteria should be written down before the freeze happens.
Operationally, set up a daily cash check at a fixed time. Simple script. Compare expected payout to settled payout. Flag variance over a threshold. Save 10% or a minimum dollar amount. Automate that alert to a Slack channel and to a named person who has permission to act. If you're running on spreadsheets, a single focused daily row will do the job until you build something fancier.
Good. Now let's move to the legal lens and an anonymized redline demo. Jessica, take us through the clauses that typically give processors the unilateral right to hold funds and what to push back on.
Most processor agreements include broad language like the processor may reserve funds for chargebacks, fraud, or suspected violations. That reads like a blank check. In negotiation, narrow 2 elements: trigger specificity and proportionality. For triggers, replace blanket phrases with defined events. Chargeback rate exceeds X%, confirmed policy violation, court order. For proportionality, limit reserves to a percentage tied to demonstrable exposure and require periodic release with review intervals. So instead of processor may hold funds, language could read, processor may place a reserve only upon documented chargebacks exceeding 5% of monthly volume or upon receipt of a verified law enforcement notice. Any reserve must be limited to the documented disputed amounts, plus costs no greater than 25% of that total, and reviewed at least every 14 days. That kind of specificity flips the power back to the merchant to demand documentation and cadence.
That example gave us roughly 7 days of available cash back in a real case you worked on, right? Walk us through what documentation should look like so a business can actually ask for it when funds are held.
Documentation should be evidence first. Merchant transaction logs, match of buyer identity to IP and device signals, copies of customer communications, dispute receipts, and any fraud investigations run by the processor with timestamps. Importantly, ask for a chain of custody-style summary: who reviewed the case, what rules fired, and why the reserve amount equals X. If the processor can't produce it, you have a stronger argument to reduce or release the reserve.
From the tech side, capture the minimal automation to produce that evidence quickly. Transaction export with timestamps, IP and device fingerprint snapshots, and an events log for chargebacks and disputes. You don't need full-blown forensics. Start with CSV exports and a preserved copy of the customer-facing interaction that led to the dispute.
Great. Let's get into ops and evidence. What does an evidence-first dispute workflow look like in practice? Eddie, you want to walk us through a step-by-step?
Sure. Step 1. Capture. As soon as a dispute or unusual hold appears, export the transaction row and related metadata. Step 2. Assemble. Pull customer communications, refund attempts, IP/device data, and any delivery or service confirmation. Step 3. Summarize. Create a one-page evidence packet with a timeline and recommended disposition. Refund, defend, or escalate. Step 4. Communicate. Send the packet to the processor with a concise request. Reduce reserve by X or release hold pending review, citing the contract clause you negotiated.
And don't forget escalation ladder language. If the processor declines to act, you escalate to a named client manager, then to legal. Your contract should include a contact and a 48-hour review requirement for escalations. If you hit a wall, that's when to pause and call counsel, rather than escalate rhetorical pressure that could worsen the relationship.
Okay, now the 30-day payment ops risk kit. Think of this as the sprint you run post-freeze to harden operations. Week 1 is triage. Quantify exposure, assemble evidence packets, and push the first negotiation. Week 2, you run reconciliations to close timing gaps and chase missing remittances. Week 3, you finalize contracts and start limited A/B negotiation against a processor pilot. Week 4, you lock in operational cadence, daily cash checks, weekly stakeholder sync, and the templates for disputes and red lines.
Specific checklist items: daily settlement compare, weekly reconciliation of processor statements, a template dispute email with evidence attached, a contract redline checklist, and a named escalation contact list. Keep everything in a shared folder with versioning so you can produce it quickly when asked.
And for templates, we intentionally keep language conservative and platform agnostic. Use the red line language we discussed as a starting point and always run final language by counsel. That's part of our risk mitigation. People can use these tools to act quickly without accidentally creating new liability.
Let's run 3 rapid scenarios so listeners can see expected outcomes. Scenario 1, subscription refund spike because a feature rollout had a bug and 200 customers filed disputes. How do you apply the playbook?
Immediate action: export the transactions, correlate them to the release window, and assemble a rollout timeline showing the bug's impact. That evidence will show the disputes are correlated to a known issue and support a request to limit reserve size and speed release. If you can show proactive remediation, refunds issued, rollback performed, that helps your case.
Legally, you present the evidence packet and negotiation language to the processor, ask for a temporary reduction in reserve tied to your refund cadence, and offer a remediation plan. If the processor still cites risk, escalate using your contract's review cadence. The goal is to convert an indefinite hold into a time-boxed workflow tied to known remediation steps.
Scenario 2, a merchant seeing a high chargeback rate because of a small number of fraudulent cards. How do you prioritize?
Prioritize closing the fraud hole, immediate blocking of offending bins or IP ranges, implement simple 3DS settings if available, and flag high-risk patterns. Simultaneously, use your daily check to quantify the impact and feed that into negotiations to keep reserves proportionate to actual exposure rather than pulling a blunt instrument.
Also, document your remediation steps thoroughly. If you can show active fraud mitigation, processors are often willing to reduce reserves because the risk diminishes. But be careful. Don't misrepresent facts. Honest, evidence-based communication works best.
Scenario 3, delayed settlement after a fraud spike. Your processor is slow to release funds post-review. What outcome can the playbook get you?
You try a contractual, evidence-based ask for phased releases tied to reconciled amounts. If your contract includes specified review intervals, enforce them. If not, push for a negotiated cadence and document concessions. If the processor refuses without explanation and your contract left them latitude, that's when counsel should step in.
Operationally, push for interim payments that match reconciled transactions so you aren't waiting on a full release for everything. Often a partial release reduces immediate strain and buys time to sort disputed items.
We're almost out of time, so quick recap. 1. Tighten contract language to narrow hold triggers and require review cadence. 2. Use an evidence-first dispute workflow so you can ask for reserve reductions with substantiation. 3. Run a 30-day sprint. Daily cash checks, weekly reconciliations, and templates you can use right away. These are low-lift, high-impact moves that protect operating cash without heavy engineering.
One last practical note. Treat the templates and red lines as starting points, not final legal advice. Use them to get organized, then run final language past counsel, especially if your processor uses proprietary rules. That preserves leverage and avoids unintended commitments.
And for tech, start with the simplest telemetry that tells you money in versus money out. You can build sophistication later. What matters is consistent, reliable signals so you don't get surprised on payday.
To get the full Payment Ops Risk Kit, edible contract checklist, dispute templates, negotiation phrases, and a daily weekly reconciliation checklist, head to hiddenbusinessrisk.com. There's a short video briefing there that walks through this episode's example and gives you the files you can download and adapt this week. Thanks to Jessica Mays for the legal clarity and to Eddie Klein for the ops and tech grounding. If this hit a nerve, good. Start with a single daily cash check and one contract clause to negotiate. Small, repeatable choices stop big surprises.
Thanks. Remember, pause before you make contractual changes and run them by counsel. Use the kit as a playbook, not a final contract.
And if you want a simple checklist to hand to your ops or finance lead today, the briefing on hiddenbusinessrisk.com has that ready. Small steps, big protection.